boys and girls. A to Z Mysteries, The Absent Author, written by Ron Roy, published by Scholastic. This is our last chapter, chapter 10. So, we have Ruth Rose. What are you talking about? Josh said. Dink didn't know what to think except he was getting a headache. What makes you think I'm Wallace Wallace? Mavis asked. Ruth Rose walked over to Mavis. May I borrow your scarf? She said. Ruth Rose held the scarf up so everyone could see it. When I first saw this scarf, I thought these little black letters were M's. She said, M for Mavis. She looked at Mavis Green. But they're not M's, are they? She turned the scarf completely upside down. What do they look like now? Dink stepped closer. They're little W's now. Right. W for Wallace Wallace. Ruth Rose pointed at the man. You just said you lived in a little cottage, but Wallace Wallace lives in a big castle in Maine. It says so on the cover of The Silent Swamp. Ruth Rose pointed at Mavis's book bag. See, your bag again made me remember something I thought of today. Josh read that your castle was called Moose Manor, and there's a picture of a moose on the side of your bag. Ruth Rose handed the scarf back to Mavis, and we read that Wallace Wallace's favorite color is green. You like green ice cream, and you chose Mavis Green for your fake name. Everyone was staring at Ruth Rose except for the man they had untied. He started laughing. The cat's out of the bag now, sis, he said. Then Mavis started laughing, and she gave Ruth Rose a hug. Yes, Ruth Rose, Mavis said. I really am Wallace Wallace. She put her hand on the man's shoulder. This is my brother, Walker Wallace. We've been planning my kidnapping for weeks. Dink stared at Mavis, or whoever she was. You mean Wallace Wallace is a woman? He said. Yes, Dink, I'm a woman. I'm definitely Wallace Wallace. She winked at him, honest. Mavis, the real Wallace Wallace, sat on the bed, and she took off her glasses and pulled the barrettes out of her hair. She shook her hair until it pulled out in a wild mass of curls. Thank goodness I can be myself now, she said. All day I've been acting like timid Mavis Green. I can't wait to get out of this fuddy-duddy dress and put my jeans on again. She kicked off her shoes and wiggled her toes in the air. Boy, does that feel good. Dink blinked and shook his head. Mavis Green really was Wallace Wallace? He couldn't believe it. But why did you pretend to be kidnapped? He asked. The real Wallace Wallace grinned at the kids' surprised faces. I owe you an explanation, she said. My new book is about a children's mystery writer who gets kidnapped. In my book, some children rescue the writer, and I wanted to find out how real kids might solve a mystery, she explained. She smiled at Dink. Then your letter came inviting me to Greenlawn. That's what gave me the idea to fake my own kidnapping. I'd become Mavis Green and watch what happened. Oh, yeah, Dink said. In your letter you said you were doing some research in Connecticut. She nodded. Yes, and I mentioned the word kidnapped in the letter to get you thinking along those lines. She smiled at the three kids. I thought I'd have to give you more clues, but you solved the mystery all by yourselves. Dink laughed. You recognized me in the bookstore from my picture, he said, and you didn't send me a picture so that I wouldn't recognize you. Then my nutty sister dragged me into her plan, Walker Wallace said. I should be home checking my lobster pots. While you were eating lunch, Walker and I ate ours up here, Wallace said. Then, just before 2 o'clock, I tied him up in the chair and ran downstairs to meet you out front as Mavis. Wallace Wallace threw back her head and laughed. Do you remember downstairs when Dink said there was something fishy on the third floor? She got up and stood next to her brother. Well, I'm always teasing Walker about smelling fishy from handling his lobster bait. So when you said something was fishy in the hotel, I had to pretend to cough so you wouldn't know I was really actually laughing. Boy, did you have us fooled, Dink said. Wallace grinned. Mr. Paskey was in on it. I had to tell him the truth. As you saw this morning at the Book Nook, my little scheme made him very nervous. I've promised him I'll come back and do a real book signing soon. But I'll be in disguise, so be prepared for anything. Dink shook his head. I was so disappointed because I couldn't meet my favorite author this morning, he said. And I've been with you all day and didn't even know it. She looked at Dink. I'm so sorry I tricked you. Will you forgive me? Dink blushed. Sure. I have a question, Josh asked. Where did you really sleep last night? Right here, in room 302. A few weeks ago, I telephoned to reserve 2 rooms next to each other. Last night, I checked into room 303 as Wallace, the man. Up in room 303, I took off the hat, coat, and sunglasses. Then I sneaked back down to the lobby wearing a blonde wig, and I checked into room 302. Did you smudge the signature? Ruth Rose asked. Oh, you noticed that, Wallace said. I'm so used to signing my real name in books, I started writing Wallace, so I accidentally smudged it. I have a question, Mavis. Miss Wallace. What should we call you? Dink asked. My friends call me Wallace, she said. Well, the taxi driver told us you were smiling in the taxi. What were you smiling about? Wallace was smiling now. Oh, about a lot of things. First, I'm going to back up and reread for accuracy. First, I was wearing a man's disguise, and that made me feel pretty silly. And I knew I was going to meet you, one of my biggest fans, and I was happy because I knew whatever happened, the next day would be fun. I sure had fun, Josh said, grinning. Poor Mr. Paskey, having to lie to everyone with a straight face. Boy, did I have a hard time pretending to be Mavis all day, Wallace said. But my plan worked. I met 3 brilliant detectives. You helped me to see how real kids would investigate a kidnapping. Now, I can go back to Maine and finish my book. How come your book jackets never say you're a woman? Ruth Rose asked. Wallace smiled. Because of my name, most people assume that I'm a man. She explained, I let them think that so I can do my research easier. I've learned that people can clam up if they know I'm Wallace. So out in public, I pretend to be Mavis Green. Just a regular person, not a mystery writer. Yeah. I get it, Dink said. You don't have your picture on your book so people can't recognize you. Right. And I hope you'll keep my secret. We will. Right, guys? Ruth Rose said. Thank you. Any more questions? Wallace asked. Yeah, Walker said, giving his sister a look. When do we leave? I've got lobsters waiting for me to catch. I have a question too, Dink said. Will you send me your picture now? Yes, but I'll do better than that, Wallace said. I'll dedicate my next book to my 3 new friends. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose did a triple high five. Excuse me. Oh, please, excuse me, Mr. Linkletter said from the door where he had been standing. They all looked at him. It's nearly checkout time, he said. Everyone laughed. Mr. Linkletter smiled, but just a little smile. And that is the end of the A to Z Mysteries, The Absent Author. I hope you enjoyed it. So everyone voted for our new book, and it will be the Triplet Trouble book, not Pizza Party that we read in class. This one's like a cookie caper. So we will start that book tomorrow. See you soon.